Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new NVIDIA daily update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over NVIDIA stock. Let's go over what is happening to the stock, what we can expect moving forward, and all that good stuff. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed, please don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice, and I am not a financial advisor. And of course, if you enjoy my technical analysis, thoughts on the charts, etc., well, I do share my thoughts with my members every single day the market is open, as the market is actually trading. So if you want to hear it throughout the trading day, not just at the very end like this, where it's sometimes too late, well, that link is down below. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, just for $3 a month, you get access to my post updates, etc. on Tesla stock, mainly Tesla stock. Sometimes I'll talk about other stocks as well, of course. Or for $5 a month, gives you everything in the first year I just mentioned, plus NVIDIA updates constantly throughout the day as the market is live trading, essentially. So link is below. Love to have you there for YouTube membership. Jumping into it, however, NVIDIA pretty much flat on the day, closing down 0.2% on the day, closing at $110.71, and down a bit post-market, which is a bit of an underperformance, not only compared to the NASDAQ, or I guess the Qs really, but it's an underperformance because it started off really good and it just essentially bled out the rest of the day. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the daily first, right? And this is what I was telling my members about this morning, actually. If I go all the way down to the morning updates, which was where are the morning updates? Right over here, right? We talked about them all the way over here, and I mentioned how the 112-ish region is gonna be really important for the NVIDIA to hold, right? And then as it started, kind of going throughout this trading day, you can see it's constantly been bouncing off those levels I mentioned. Like if you compare this level here, for instance, to like this post over here, which was like not too much longer ago, right? This was the first one. You can see I mentioned how it pretty much needs to bounce literally right here. And then what did it do? It got the small little bounce and it's holding on. However, there are some concerning signs, at least on the 1 hour chart. So starting off with the daily first, the daily is looking, the daily is actually looking okay. If I take the Fibonacci from here, let me actually see what this looks like. I'm kind of curious, roughly from here to here, just give or take. Yeah, you can see it's actually getting right into a potential massive rejection zone. So this is a pretty important area NVIDIA is in right now. This is the bulls really need to start breaking past these levels that it's roughly at right now. So the daily, the market bias, or if, the 20-day moving average, whatever you want to call it in this case, I'll just call it market bias, mean reversion line, whatever. It's red. It's still red, right? So that essentially means that it's not fully believing this move up just yet, right? The bulls really want to continue holding up above these levels for this to essentially turn white, essentially, which is, green, white, whatever. That's gonna be important, right? So let's see if that can happen. Unfortunately, there are some concerning signs when you take a more zoomed in approach to this right now, because again, assuming the bulls can, and assuming NVIDIA gets a gap up tomorrow, which it desperately needs, I'll go over why very soon, then the bulls are still in play here, and a move higher, especially once it breaks this kind of 114-ish range, should be in play. First level will be about 118 to a potentially as high as about this 122, 123 range, which of course will be just a retest of this massive downward channel that NVIDIA is still very much in, very large one. So that needs to break, right? That's kind of what the main goal would be for NVIDIA to do so, of course, if it gets that strength that it needs. But let's talk about the strength on the 1 hour time frame. So you can see, in the 1 hour time frame, we are in this fairly steep, you can say, rising channel. And you can see every time it's pulled back so far to this kind of market bias, if you will, after it finally broke above, it's been bouncing decently well. It's been holding up pretty nicely. But the one thing that's concerning, there's two concerning signs. First of which being every time it's come down, it's been bouncing more and more like weaker, I guess you can see, right? So first they had that massive gap up, came down right into it, very strong bounce, came down into it, decently strong bounce, came back down into it, very weak bounce. The bounces are getting weaker and weaker and weaker. That's concern number one. Concern number two is the fact that we're starting to show signs of falling out. This is not good, right? You can see how, if I zoom in very closely here, you can see, throughout today's trading range, right, when NVIDIA came right back to this level, you can see every time it came to this trend line, it's bounced, right? It's gotten these small little bounces that have been getting weaker and weaker, unfortunately, but it's been getting those bounces. So we kind of closed with, peeking our head essentially outside of this rising channel, which isn't good, which is why I said a gap up is needed, because if we get a gap down to start the day off tomorrow, that could be a potential problem, right? That absolutely can be something that's not ideal for the bulls, right? That would be a concern for sure. So let's see how that opens up tomorrow morning. So if we see a gap down, yeah, that's a bit of a red flag. I'm not gonna lie. Unless it miraculously recovers well above that and essentially cracks 112 again. 112 becomes the next crucial level, because you can see in the first hour of trading, this is where I did my initial day trade and I exited for profit and pretty much didn't even look at the market for the most of the day, and other than giving the updates to my members, was this first hour candle. It came, massive gap up, came right down into this kind of 112-ish region. And you can see, initially it seemed like, yeah, this is not too bad. It looks like it can actually hold, right? Because this level, you can see right here, for instance, was an area of resistance, area of support, area of resistance, like right around that, 112-ish range, we'll say, right? And you can see once again in the first hour, it tried to turn it back into support, couldn't do that, fell down below, and now you can see it's turning it back into a resistance, which is not good for the bulls. And it's also looking like it wants to potentially break down from this rising channel as well. So there's some work to do for the bulls here, right? It's not impossible, but at the very least, at least in my opinion, it needs a gap up to start the day off tomorrow morning. So let's see if the bulls can get that, right? That'll be really, really important. If they can, then we naturally assume that the path upwards in this rising channel continues. And, looking for a potential move closer to the low to mid 120s is still on the table, right? But if we lose this rising channel, if we do get a gap down tomorrow, which at the moment is looking pretty likely, that would not be what the bulls want to see. And that means that we most likely make our way down further, probably decently further, at the very least to 106, which has been a pretty contested level. If I zoom out here, 106 here, 106 here, here, even here, right? That'll be the first level to look for. Break down below that, I wouldn't be surprised to see closer to $100 per share. And if we break below $100 per share, well, that's when we start entering, of course, potentially a retest all the way down here, closer to the mid to even the lower end of the 90s once again. So it'll just be a level by level basis. Now, obviously, one argument you could be making if you're a bull, and if it does, let's say, come back down to, let's say, the mid 90s roughly. Also, we had a bullish head and shoulders pattern that just didn't want to trigger. It could have triggered this morning. The bulls held on, but they didn't. Unfortunately, the stock did give up the gains that it needed to hold, which is disappointing. But one thing you can make an argument for is if NVIDIA does come back down to, let's say, the mid to low 190s, is even on the daily chart, for instance, you can make an argument that it can look like a double bottom where you had a nice move to the downside. Then you can go like something like this, and then we can finally make our way back up. That is something to consider. Obviously, there's still, a ways away before we look into that whatsoever, but there's something to think about potentially moving into, the next few days to weeks, honestly, right? This will take some time, of course, most likely. But the main thing I'll be looking at tomorrow morning is just whether or not we get a gap down or gap up. If we get a gap down, the most likely the bullish trend to the upside, especially in the short term, has most likely faded. And then we start looking for potential retrace down here. You can even make an argument that, you can take a nice little Fibonacci over here and look at these major retracement levels, which actually line up pretty well with the levels I just mentioned. We have the 382 sitting at very close to that 106 level. That'll be the first level to look for, right? So 105, we'll say, to make it simple. Then we have the 0.5 Fibonacci sitting pretty much at 100, which we just talked about. And of course, we have the 618 sitting closer to 97, which is that next level you can see right here, right? Also a big area of support and resistance, followed by below that, if things really just go bad, if the market really decides to tank, or Trump says something, or whatever the case may be and whatever the reason may be, a final move, one more move down to 91 to 92 for a potential bullish, and this is still while maintaining the bullish retracement theory, can be all the way down here, which can also set up a double bottom, but it'll also retrace into a deep discount range because technically speaking, we did break these highs on this move up, which is good for the bulls. That actually shows potentially good structure. But if we lose this rising channel, that means we get a correction, and this could be that final bullish correction that we get before we actually finally break out and actually start making a overall bullish reversal. But that's assuming that these Fibonacci levels hold, because if these Fibonacci levels do not hold, and especially if you make a fresh new low, that would be pretty bearish, obviously. So there's a lot of information to watch out for moving forward for NVIDIA here and to see how it plays out. But the simplest way of looking at it for now, simply put, is, well, if we get a gap down, then most likely expect a retracement back down to the low 100s at least, to most likely cool off, and then we'll see how it reacts around those levels with the Fibonacci's I just mentioned and see how it goes from there. And of course, that will put the weekly back into question as well. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done for the bulls. It's not a phenomenal look, but there is still hope, only because the 1 hour has broken these highs over here. This high right over here, you can see, right, we're making lower lows, lower highs constantly, right? And then we finally broke this high over here, this pivot point, which is a good sign for the bulls, which is a fresh higher high, which is nice. So now the question could be, now that we've set that fresh higher high, can we set on this potential retrace that we're seemingly about to get with this breakdown from this rising channel, can we set a fresh higher low from this low back here? And then we will have a nice change in pivot from essentially constantly making lower lows, lower highs. If I zoom out like this, you can see, for instance, right? If I go here, right? Essentially making these lower lows, lower highs like this, right? Constantly making lower lows, lower highs, to now making a higher high and a higher low, right? This would be a higher high and a higher low, and then that could be a potential reversal trend structure. So could be something to watch for. It seems like that's what we'll get. I mean, right now, post-market seems pretty red. So, seems like that's the likely outcome right now for sure. But yeah, that's going to be my perspective right now for NVIDIA. Let's see how this plays out. But if we do get this retracement, there actually is a potential that this is that final retracement to the downside before we get an overall market reversal. Because if you look at something like the QQQs very quickly, right, you can see the Qs are sitting at a pretty my goodness, at a pretty important level, right? It did revert to the mean over here on Qs as well. You can see with the 20-day moving average, which is fine. And this is getting some rejection on top of this trend line rejection right here, this white line over here. But if the Qs can break out of this, that'll be really, really bullish, right? So, you know, it's not there just yet, and it's clearly showing potential signs of another rejection, which if NVIDIA falls down, this can also come back down once again as well to the 430s, which is kind of what NVIDIA will do if it comes down to, let's say, $100 again. But this could be that final retracement before it breaks out and also makes a nice pivot as well. So let's see how that ultimately plays out. That there is potential for that. But until this trend line breaks through the Qs, you know, it's not really out of the woods just yet. And the final thing is the VIX, of course, right? The VIX is taking this level right here that was a resistance and seemingly trying to turn it back into support. So another thing to look out for the markets to potentially rally, which of course will include NVIDIA, is the VIX essentially losing 28 to 30, getting daily closures below 28 to 30, ideally below 28, which will then really start to crush out the VIX, which will then give the market room to breathe and ultimately start looking for that next leg higher. But while the VIX is still above 30, the caution is still warranted. So yeah, I mean, that's probably the easiest way of looking at things in terms of confirmed options flow and whatnot for NVIDIA. Let's take a quick look over here. Yeah, some bearishness towards the end of the day. You can see here another 92 put coming in, highly unusual, expiring next week. So bears are clearly expecting downside for NVIDIA. And, you know, I can't say I fully disagree right here, right now with them. This does look like it wants to break down, make that final potential bullish retracement, and then make its way higher. So I'll be looking very intently on NVIDIA. If I see a pullback once again closer to $100 per share, and especially below, that could be a potential opportunity presenting itself, even though the weekly is still concerning. I'm not going to lie, but you know, we'll have to take it step by step, unfortunately. It's just, you know, the market's in a finicky spot, to say the least. But yeah, if the market does that retracement, that would, of course, give VIX that small little bump. And then, of course, if the market does overall have that final bullish retracement and then heads higher, that most likely will have VIX do something like this. So yeah, let's see. That's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow. Peace.